Redditors who explore abandoned places, what was the strangest, scariest, creepiest thing you have found? There are cabins on my reservation alongside a lake. During the 80s the head of the tribe pretty much evicted everyone who wasn't a member of the tribe from the cabins. I've been there several times. And it's always eerie. You're going to a place that's been frozen in time. There's cans of food with familiar brands. But logos that are different. There are newspapers scattered around with dates from the 1980s. There are spray painted pentagrams /666 in some of the cabins. They evicted non-tribal members and just forgot about the place. So some of the cabins are halfway collapsed. Some of the cabins are haunts for junkies, so there are needles, broken paraphernalia strewn about. It's a strange place to be. My cousin's grandmother's old house. She lived 100 meters from where we live. And when I was 1-2 years old she died. I went to explore her house. Since we are the closest building to her house. When I tried the door it was locked. So I went up on a broken window and climbed in. I didn't expect much. Since it was a pretty tiny house. It did have an attic but no basement. Or I just couldn't find it. So I started looking some places up. Her bedroom. Living room and such. I found some kind of closet or something like that. It was pretty big for a closet. But I opened the door and I got scared as fuck. There was some kind of mannequin. It had a dress on. Black. Like something you would wear in a funeral. I just decided to leave after that. From Philly. Lots of abandoned places. Weirdest one I went to was when I was 18 and went to an abandoned elementary school. Climbed through a broken window and navigated through a flooded basement to get to the ground floor. All of the classrooms were destroyed. Desks flipped over. Graffiti covering the walls. Everything seemed destroyed except for the children's books that were still on the shelves. I opened one up. A picture book. And started flipping through the pages. Someone had wrote "die" in black marker on all of the pages. I picked up another book. The same thing. "Die" written in black. I looked at all of the books at that point. Someone had actually taken the time to write "die" on every single page of every book that was still there. In every classroom. Every single book. I left in a heartbeat. My friends and I visited some abandoned factories in Detroit a while ago when we were in high school. There was nothing really out of the ordinary. Just a bunch of garbage on floor and graffiti. After a while of us being there we started hearing some voices coming from a floor above us. And then some hushing. Keep in mind. This was at night. So my immediate thought was a drug deal happening. So I wanted to get out of there ASAP. Next thing we knew there was a guy coming down the stairs. I only got to see that he had black clothes and some green shoes before I booked it. The guy proceeded to chase us with one of his buddies. When we got to the ground floor, we heard one of our friends call from higher up to come back. Turns out the guys chasing us were one of our friend's older brother and his friend trying to prank us. We just happened to stumble into each other at the factory. No plan to meet at all. I calmed down after. But in the heat of the moment I thought we were goners. I am not a regular explorer. But I grew up in a small rural New England town and as a kid would always venture into the woods and find neat old things. My dad noticed that I was really interested in exploring and finding old things near our land, so one day asked if I wanted to go see something that no one else he knew had known about. I jumped at the chance and we drove off into the mountains and parked on the side of the road. We got out and walked into the woods for what felt like 45 minutes and we came across this really small cemetery. There had to be 10 or so stones and you couldn't really make out anything on them. But a couple of them that read something like 1802, 1803, and 1803, 1805. My dad said he stumbled on it as a kid and it must have been a small family cemetery. It just kind of broke my heart thinking about how many of those stones were probably infant toddler. For my job I had to measure empty apartments. These kind of social housing ones. Some of the people there got evicted. Moved out or died in these apartments. I sometimes felt like an intruder as I entered these apartments. All of the stuff still inside. Like they left the day before. Like I was casually walking in another person's private space. Fridge filled and mail on the table. I saw the weirdest things. One time there was an entire room filled with plastic bags filled with piss from bladder catheters. A f***ing whole room. An iron lung. Well, two actually. We were exploring an abandoned TB hospital back in high school. We made it into the basement and noticed some areas that weren't as vandalized. We didn't have the stones to head into the morgue, but there was a room we started moving towards that had a bunch of metal hooks and chains hanging from the ceiling. No idea what that was for. But glad we noticed it before we walked right into it. Abandoned TB hospital. I hope you wore masks with biofilters. Some microbes can stay alive and dormant for a long time. You always want to wear a mask while doing urbex. Asbestos is no joke. And the dust laying around probably has a lot more nasty shit than that. Lead paint is pretty common as well. The air tends to be one giant carcinogenic cocktail. And that's before you get into what kind of nasty can still be lingering in old hospitals. Or the rodent and insect fesses the place is probably lousy with. Tucking your socks into your jeans is a good idea. 2. You don't want flea bites from animals living in abandoned spaces. It bugs me how many people go into exploring without research. This stuff can mess you up for life. Oh, also, I forgot to mention this, but after we stopped going to this abandoned place, we went to an old farm that had been abandoned. Right opposite the farm was a house that was being sold, but nobody was living there at the time. My friend brought a camera and we were going to do a video exploring the place, but we got sidetracked and just explored. There was a noose in the barn house, which I thought was weird, but probably just someone trying to scare people. After we explored the barn, we went into the actual house, which was quite large and derelict. After exploring the bottom half, we played rock paper scissors to determine who would go up the stairs first. I picked the short straw, and as soon as I poked my head around the corner of the stairway, I swear on God I say this woman with black hair standing next to a bed and bolted the FCK down the stairs. Sadly we didn't capture it on film because we weren't recording, but Jesus Christ, I was spooked. Another time we were chased by a farmer who looked like Hagrid. I shit you not. He had a long beard and wore blue dungaroos or whatever you call them. I've done a lot of urban exploration in abandoned houses, psychiatric institutions, hospitals, etc. I think one of the strangest things I've ever found was inside of a housing building at an abandoned psychiatric facility. This facility was unique as it had about 100 buildings on the property, and this particular building I was in was used as living space for people who were being prepared for transitioning back into everyday life. It was basically like a small hospital with 15 bedrooms and some staff rooms. I was with a friend and we were exploring the bedrooms with our flashlights, and I walk through the doorway into one of the bedrooms and there's a full-size male white-tailed deer with antlers probably 4 feet across standing about 5 feet in front of me in the middle of the bedroom. He froze. I froze. And then my friend came up behind me, saw the deer, screamed, and ran. As soon as my friend screamed, the deer jumped and turned around and ran into the wall. I didn't stick around long enough to see where he went next, lol. Sorry for formatting, but I'm on mobile and Reddit retarded. Used to live way back in some mountains in Virginia. I was a senior in high school and was riding around on 4-wheelers and dirt bikes with some buddies. We were on some random land way back in the woods and stumbled upon a worn down house. I'm talking to the point where the roof was, or appeared to be, extremely close to caving in. It was around 7/8 PM, so it was fairly dark, and being high school kids we of course went into the house. Nothing remarkable, and then we reached the room at the very back of the house. In the room in the back of this shitty hole, falling apart house is a white baby crib in perfect condition. Looked absolutely brand new and wasn't covered in dust dirt like everything else in the house. Maybe not so creepy now, but made absolutely zero sense and freaked us all the hell out. I was walking with a friend and we were trying to find a quicker route back to where we were staying. We were walking on a road next to the ocean, which was quite a bit below us. We thought it would be more scenic to walk on the beach, so we climbed down only to discover it wasn't going to be easy walking. Where we expected sand, there was boulders, and we had to climb and jump in order to keep going forward. And it was pretty abandoned. Clearly, This wasn't a public area and the road we were walking on was out of sight. After a while, I saw a cave that sort of looked like it had a green net covering the entrance. My friend was, rightfully, freaked out. But I was insistent on looking inside. I climbed over to it and pulled the curtain away, only to see massive piles of abalone shells. There were thousands of them. We had found a poacher's hiding place for their shells. Where I'm from, poachers are normally armed and pouching abalone shells is quite illegal. So it's scary to think that we could have been attacked and nobody would have been able to even hear us. At the time, my friend and I were 13. Found an old school bus sitting out in the middle of the woods. It had been converted for living, complete with a small kitchen and a wood stove. On the table was a deck of cards, an overflowing ashtray and a cup that had had coffee in it that had long since dried out. Clean bushes in the dish rack covered with dust and mouse droppings. Cupboard doors open in the kitchen showed cans of Campbell's soup, condensed milk and boxes of crackers that had been ransacked by mice. The bed was trashed by animals. Pillows ripped apart and the stuffing spread all over. Underneath a shredded blanket the leg of a teddy bear peeked out. Old books on the bedside table had swelled up from getting wet and were covered in mold. Ragged curtains with a cheerful flower print hung around the windows. Outside a rusted swing set stood between the trees, the one swing covered in moss. An old pickup truck was parked nearby, although there was no sign of a road anywhere. Split firewood was stacked against the side of the bus. The creepiest thing about it? The bullet holes that covered the rear window. Me and a few friends broke into an old abandoned hospital to have a cheeky smoke. We thought it would be fun to head to a separate and much smaller part of the hospital where they would keep mental patients. We scaled the second fence surrounding it but couldn't find a way in as all the doors were locked or barred, so we opted to smoke inside one of the entrances instead. Shortly after sparking up I heard some noises coming from inside but didn't think much of them since it was probably rats or birds, so I didn't mention anything. Then I heard a voice. I told the lads I heard something but they thought I was memeing, so carried on smoking. Listening out for it, I heard a voice again. This time one of the boys heard it as well. Everyone had SFU and were listening intently when bam! The freaking door we were next to shook violently and everyone just booked it, scaling both fences like we were a pack of monkeys. When we were out everyone was pissing themselves. Should have seen your face etc etc. It was probably just a hobo but it felt like the start of a horror movie. Only we ran away before Act 2. Even though no one is going to read this, I wanna share. It was an abandoned house in Kosovo. The rumors say that the owners were killed and their souls still roam the house. The normal stuff. Me and my friends at the age of 11, yup, 11, went into that house. It was on a mountain, I don't know where it was. We went in there to see the fireplace was on. I'm kind of a nature guy, so I immediately noticed that it was put on just a few minutes ago when we had not arrived yet. We find some papers with pentagrams and some paper with Latin words as well. There wasn't an attic or a basement, just a one-floor building. Suddenly we hear something that sounds like footsteps. The house had no roof. I immediately go to check out who it was and nothing. Literally nothing. We look around the house and again nothing. We had 2 dogs with us and we tied them up outside. Just as we were staying peacefully, our 2 dogs bark. We look outside and my corner of my eye saw a shadow. My friends saw it too. We thought it was an animal. Fast forward to an hour later, all of us were sleeping. Even the dogs too. Until we all wake up to what sounded like pounding on the wall. We go to check it out and there is nothing. A friend we left inside was there and he swore he had heard and saw something. We didn't believe him. So we make some tea, eat stuff until I went outside and gave the dogs some food. I saw something looking at us from below. It wasn't an animal. It was completely black. I rush inside and tell the friends what I saw. I go outside and don't see it at that spot. I looked around and saw it. It was closer. I called my friends to come see it and they all saw what I saw. A completely black figure. We packed our stuff and left in a rush. For me, it's always the evidence that a place isn't abandoned that I find scariest. I love poking around in places I shouldn't be just for the joy of seeing a rare sight. But the moment I see a tent, bedroll, or telltale toilet tissue tower, I turn right the hell around. I don't want to surprise a squatter. I'm confident in saying that I get more conversational with your standard panhandlers, gutter punks, and vagrants than most. And I find that even the ones who are laid back tend to get their hackles up if someone surprises them at a camp they thought was hidden. That and track traffic. If a railway runs through your city or town, specifically an old freight line, chances are that half of it is more or less out of use and has a variety of ramshackle locations that could be very fun to poke at. That said, I've been on disused tracks and had specially outfitted pickups and motorized handcars sneak up on me pretty fucking close before I realized they were coming up on me. And tell you what, I dive into the bushes every time. I don't know how much they'd care if they saw me, and I don't wish to find out. I was looking in some old motel, little rooms, on a rural South Carolina highway. I was working as a photographer for TV news. We were doing stand-ups and the reporter was trying to think of what to say. I went exploring. I was going toward the center building on the back row of the motel when my reporter said he was ready. So I shot the stand-up and we left. 2 days later we got a call from the sheriff's office asking about what we were doing there. We told him. It turns out there was a dead man hanging from some vines tied to the ceiling of the room. He had been beaten and hanged. I was a few feet from finding this dead person. The motel is nearly rotted into the ground today. I think the word pine was in the name of the motel. Friend of mine and I explored this old abandoned house deep in the woods near his house. Going through it, we found baby grand pianos of varying sizes throughout the house. But that wasn't the weird thing. We also found letters, dated back to World War I. From a wife to her husband stationed overseas. At first they were letters of how things were in the States. How the kids were. How life without him. And how much she loved and missed him. The more we read though, the more the letters turned into something we weren't expecting. She had fallen out of love with him and found another man. She left him for another man while serving his country overseas. It was sad reading those last few letters. Finally, a Reddit thread I can contribute to. There's a Walmart near my house that's been vacant for a while. All the shelves and stuff are gone, so it's just the basic structures remaining. In one of the little sub-stores, I think the pharmacy, we found a pretty creepy room. There's graffiti all over the place there. But inside this room was what I'd describe as Valentine's Day graffiti. A bunch of sappy stuff like "I'll love you for the rest of my life" and hearts and whatnot. Literally all 4 walls had graffiti from floor to ceiling on them. There were also battery-powered LED lights running along the baseboard and around the ceiling. The idea of someone bringing their "so there is a present" creeps me out. I posted a video on my Snap story but unfortunately didn't save it to my phone. I was in an old pottery mill and didn't realize a homeless junkie had turned into his home. I saw a mattress and a couple needles, heroin, and a small baggie of coke lying next to it near a high-up window. I took some photos of the mattress when this fucking dude comes out from behind an old staff locker and lunges at me with a damn spoon. I nearly shat myself and got the FCK out of there, and then whilst I was walking home I was just thinking about it and started pissing myself laughing. Who in the wrong or right mind lunges at someone with a spoon? TLDR. Some homeless dude tried to murder me with a spoon. At 19, when my 2 best friends and I were still hobbyist photographers and one of us was trying to start a vintage clothing business, we dress up and take pretend high fashion pictures at this one abandoned house nearby. It was your quintessential creepy colonial home with a little boy's room, a little girl's room, and a parent's room that was well overgrown and had clearly been there a while. Each time we went, it was a little more broken down than the first time. Clearly other trespassers were coming in and breaking shit for kicks. Then one day there was a hole broken in the living room wall. Inside it was a staircase to a room we didn't know existed before. A few weeks passed by and I took my friend's band there to take pictures of them. They were all dudes, so I felt a little more confident exploring. We went down the stairs in the wall and it ended up being this kind of neat but creepy cobblestone cave. At the end of the cave was what appeared to be a little kid's room with a big decal of a cartoon tree and what appeared to be somewhat of a Seams ring. No doors. No nothing. Just stone cave into kid's room. I know that's not nearly as creepy as some of the things people have found. But the fact it was just this hidden stair into a cave that lead to a kid's room really makes me wonder what the heck kid was living down there. There's a place in CT called the Little People Village. You walk 10 minutes or so into the woods and find a complete village of small concrete houses scattered around the woods surrounding a concrete throne with a small hole in it that allows you to see into a dark space behind it. The story goes that a man and his wife lived in a house on the site. The man started hearing voices of little people and proceeds to build homes for them. They then instruct him to build the throne. Then to kill his wife. Then to kill himself on the throne. Sitting on the throne is supposed to be bad luck. In reality, I think it's an abandoned amusement park attraction from the 50s. But when you're a teenager, you're willing to believe. Some friends worked in a park near an hospital and they called me because they found a secret tunnel during an excavation. We visited it and was full of dead people. The end was under the hospital and the entrance was closed by a wall. There was a kid inside a plastic transparent bag with a medallion and well preserved like the rest of people around. The clothes looked like from 60. The day after, the tunnel was covered by bulldozers. Anyway, the place wasn't a cemetery and without any connection with criminal activities. Amazingly, I have a story for this. So, I travel a good amount with some of my college friends and about 2 years ago we were in Belgium, mainly to see if Belgian waffles were better than regular ones, but we were hiking one time and we came across a cave. Obviously it intrigued us greatly, so we went inside. And to be honest, it was quite boring for a while, so as we were about to turn back to leave, I hear one of my friends scream, like a little girl. So I'm like, oh shit, what just happened? And so the rest of us go over there and our flashlights rest upon a creepy toy doll and above it said play with ME. On the cave wall. At this point we are all scared shitless, so we got TF out of there and we rarely ever speak of it. The rain drain systems of my city. I like to explore them as a child teen. Learn how they behave well enough and you can find yourself in massive, well decent sized, flood caverns which were basically just large rooms that fill with water when it rains. But they were fun to hang out in. Great acoustics. Every so often you come face to face with some snakes or raccoons or some other critter. But they were always more scared of me than I was of them. I did carry a knife and a beating stick just to be safe. Had a flashlight die on me. And my backup flashlight had no charge. That was easily the scariest experience. Cause I could hear all the critters moving down there with me. But not see them. Eventually I found an access tunnel. It felt like ours. Can't imagine what it looked like to passers-by. Some grungy teen climbing out of the ground onto the sidewalk. I found a huge collection of negatives, about 500-600, from a school for kids who were physically and mentally handicapped delayed. It was right after they closed and my buddy actually went to get the photo equipment left there. They literally leave everything behind. Like if you got up right now, locked your door and walked away. That's what it's like walking into these places. These negatives ranged from the 1960s, 1980s, and were of everything. Deformed kids in Halloween masks. Kids getting the Eucharist in church. Relay race games. Then there were a set where the kids were given color names. Like blue before and after. I came across probably a dozen or so. My mom, who works for DCF, said they were most likely testing drugs out on these kids and taking a before and after pic. I don't regularly explore abandoned buildings, but one time me and my buddy Sebastian went to this abandoned thrift store and found an open entrance to the back room. We found a hatch. This was in Florida, so we have never even seen a basement before. I just barely cracked it open and it smelled like something up and died in there. We noped out of there real quick. So back around 2 years ago, me and a large group of friends would explore an abandoned cinema that had been closed for around 20 years or so. I found a lot of weird and creepy stuff as well as your standard 666 graffiti and garbage. I had been in every room in the cinema and even in the basements and boiler rooms. There was still running electricity, which a group of homeless people used to install lights. By far the worst thing I found was a bunch of decapitated pigeons. They weren't there the last time I had been there, so I thought it was weird, so I noped the FCK out of there. Once when me and a group of friends went into the projector room or whatever it's called, and someone randomly grabbed a nest of pigeon eggs and started stomping and throwing them. Another group of people we didn't know who decided to tag along called him a DCK, which led to him threatening to fight this random group of 20-year-olds. Let's say me and my friends no longer associate with this guy for a few more reasons. Also, if you are thinking of going anywhere abandoned that is under surveillance or in a town, be careful. A lot of homeless people sleep in those types of places and there are likely to be needles everywhere.